Despite a grid penalty, Max Verstappen won from 14th on the grid in what could be described as inevitable fashion. Coming up on the Belgian Grand Prix-Cap, Max's win was inevitable. Was it just too easy on the day? Ferrari were again closer to Mercedes on race pace. Will the fastest car in F1 finish third overall? Hamilton and Alonso collide. I'll give my thoughts. And there are the usual race and driver ratings. So let's get stuck in to the Belgian Grand Prix-Cap. So welcome along to the Belgian Grand Prix-Cap, everybody. It's great to be back discussing Formula One racing again. At least we got some racing this year at Spa, and we'll dive into all of that. If you're watching on YouTube, you might notice that the sound and the video are not completely in sync, and that's because I've got a brand new setup. So I've recently bought a new PC, which I've been able to stream from without the thing exploding, because my old laptop probably would have if I tried that. So I haven't actually got a webcam at the moment, so I'm using my tablet, which is behind the screen, to capture the video. And I've got a new microphone down here. So it's all very shiny, very new. It's like launch season, but I'm launching in August rather than February. So yeah, that would be why it's not quite synced up, because I don't have a proper webcam yet. But everything else is going great guns. I've got a lovely new scene. I've got some fancy lights. Well, not actual lights. These ones here above my head. And, well, the 5 red lights went out on the Belgian Grand Prix, and Max Verstappen won from 14th. And first of all, I'm going to say congratulations and well done to Red Bull and to Max Verstappen, because they produced a car and a drive in a driver-car combination that was just superb. You know, it was flawless in pretty much every way. But the overriding theme, I think, from this race wasn't how good Red Bull were or how good Max Verstappen is. It's just how easy it was, even though he started the race 14th. We've seen cars and drivers come through the field before, but this was inevitable. And the drivers on the rest of the grid on Saturday were like, he'll probably still win from there because he has such a pace advantage. And the way that the Red Bull just accesses its aerodynamic efficiency makes it an absolute bullet in a straight line. And if you're setting a car up for Spa, you need to set it up to overtake, unless you're planning on starting at the front and you've got enough horsepower to keep you in the lead through the middle sector, and you can protect yourself down the Camel Straight. There was no protecting yourself from Verstappen and the Red Bull, though. These sort of victories are normally really exciting, but this one wasn't. It wasn't. Whether you're a Max Verstappen fan or not, I don't think this was an exciting race, because it was just a question of how long until he overtakes everyone, because we know he will. And there was no... The thing is, we've crossed this bridge many times. You know, what makes a race great? And it comes back to one word: jeopardy. If you think back to some of the classic races, some of the very best. So let's take Canada 2011. Jenson Button went through the pit lane 6 times and he was last at one point, and you know, the rain, and it was all crazy. The 2005 Japanese Grand Prix, we had a wet qualifying, and it was a circuit where it was difficult to overtake, but you had Alonso and Raikkonen in the 2 fastest cars, and Raikkonen came through to win it on the final lap. That was thrilling. Verstappen was in the lead on lap 12 around Spa, so that's probably like lap 24 everywhere else. So it was, unfortunately, it was a bit of a damp squib. Once he got into the lead, we just knew there was no catching him, because Red Bull, they're on point with their strategy. They know what they're doing. They're getting things right on the pit wall. You know, if it was Ferrari in this situation, maybe it would have been a bit more interesting, because, you know, yes, their drivers would probably have come through, but how long would it have taken them, and how much would the strategy have been messed up? And even this weekend, Ferrari still managed to mess up their strategy with Charles Leclerc. Red Bull just had the best package, let's be honest. it was just phenomenally fast, especially in the hands of Verstappen, who's just driving fantastically. It's the whole Sebastian Vettel syndrome. This is what I'm calling it from now on. Because if you think back to 2010, Vettel scraped that first World Championship. Verstappen, he also claimed that championship at the last race in 2021, and it was skin of your teeth stuff, because for the whole race he wasn't really catching Hamilton. It was, we all know. The next season, Red Bull produce a car that is fantastic, and Vettel goes on and wins multiple races, the title's sewn up in Suzuka. And we're looking at a similar situation here, although it's the story is slightly different, but the outcome is going to be the same. Verstappen's going to have a second World Championship to his name, and you can't deny that he deserves it now, because he has just been hands down the best driver in the best car with the best team. And it's not just they're all just number one on. All three of those are number one. Ferrari have had their moments, but Ferrari have also thrown it away. And this, I think, is the crux of this race outcome. I think if there was a real title battle, let's say Ferrari hadn't screwed everything up in the first half of the season, and Leclerc had, they were very close, or Leclerc even ahead, this race would have been wow. I mean, how are Ferrari going to respond to this? There's still that question, but it's more, how are Ferrari going to respond to this? It would have been, this is worrying for Ferrari. They've got to pull something out, but they've had the car, they've delivered results, they're in good form. It's just one of those races. That's how F1 can be sometimes. But the lack of a real edge in this title battle makes this win, it feels a bit more frustrating, because the potential for a championship battle and the significance of this result and this performance within that is so much different. If this comes within the midst of a title fight similar to Verstappen and Hamilton last year, I mean, that's what elevates Hamilton's win in Brazil to such astronomical levels of respect, because it came in the midst of the most ferocious title battle in about a decade. This win, while it was inevitable, it was straightforward. There was always that, well, if we don't win, we've still got a huge lead in both championships. It doesn't really matter. So there wasn't that jeopardy in terms of the championship picture or within the race itself. Nonetheless, a brilliant performance from Max Verstappen and from Red Bull. He delivered, he didn't get himself caught up. It would have been quite easy to get himself caught out behind the slow Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton on the first lap, pick up a puncture, all sorts. But he navigated his way through that, and that, for me, shows the increased maturity of Max Verstappen's driving. So, of course, Red Bull were out in the distance on their own. No one catching them. Ferrari, well, they started on pole position and they turned it into third place with Carlos Sainz. But they were again closer to Mercedes than Red Bull on race pace, which is worrying for the Scuderia. They're talking about the cost cap and how it's being regulated. And if Red Bull are finding a way through this, Ferrari, this is Ferrari. They need to be on top of everything. They need to be making everything almost perfect, because this is Ferrari that we expect from Ferrari. It's just one of those things. They're a bit like Manchester United in football in the Premier League. They're the massive institution, and consistently over a number of years now, they seem to be getting all the big decisions wrong. And it's clear to see, the proof is in the pudding. Manchester United haven't won a Premier League title since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and Ferrari haven't won a World Championship since 2007. And Ferrari were questionable on their strategy again for me, because they brought Sainz in early. And yeah, they started on a soft tyre. And I think they were trying to just escape, and that early safety car really put paid to that. But it was just, it didn't seem quite as fluid with Ferrari as it did with Red Bull, because Verstappen was able to extend his stint. Maybe that was the tyre setup. But with the downforce setup, Ferrari going for a slightly higher downforce setup to try and look after the tyres, but maybe it just overheated the tyres because the warm weather really sort of threw a curveball at all the teams. And that's really what saved Mercedes, because they had Russell in range of signs pretty much the whole way through. But for a couple of scrappy laps close to the end, George Russell might have been on the podium. And considering Mercedes were 2 seconds off of Red Bull's pace in qualifying, a podium would have just been a miraculous save. And the amount of questions the Ferrari engineers are asking their drivers while these guys are trying to race at close to 180, 200 miles an hour at times. There was a question to Charles Leclerc about the tyre choice and everything. It was such a long-winded question. This is what I go back to with Ferrari. We expect them to be getting everything sort of perfect, and you've got to shorten your questions. It needs to be short and concise with your communication there, because you can't be waffling on to your driver. That the information will just get lost. You know, that's why you hear certain engineers repeat. They say the sentence or the question in full, and then they just sort of use a couple of buzzwords, and that's all you need. You know, because the information might not all go quite in. And then they told Carlos Sainz to try his best. It's just laughable. The pit wall, it's almost, I don't know, it's just ridiculous. And yet, they're a Mercedes with a car that just misbehaves from day to day, track to track, and they're within, a 1-2's range of Ferrari. If Ferrari and Red Bull both fail to finish and Mercedes pick up a 1-2 in Zandvoort, Mercedes goes second in the Constructors' Championship. That puts it all into perspective for Ferrari, and I think that is the most damning assessment of their season so far. And they summed it all up because they wanted to bring Leclerc in for the fastest lap. He advised against it. He said, maybe not in this situation, on another day I might do it. They did it anyway, got stuck behind Alonso. Leclerc sped into the pit lane, didn't get the fastest lap, got a 5-second penalty and went down to 6th anyway. I mean, go figure. It is absolutely ridiculous at Ferrari. And Mercedes, they're catching up, they're improving their car. I mean, the W13 won't be the most highly regarded of Mercedes machines, but it could still finish ahead of the Ferrari, which has regularly been the fastest car this season. And we'll stay with Mercedes a little bit here because, of course, there was the collision between Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. So I'll start by saying Hamilton was ahead at the apex, whatever that means, because he'd got the slipstream, he'd got the run, he was on the racing line, taking that racing line in. Usually that's enough to, just sort of win the corner. I mean, I don't like that phrase because everyone's entitled to race. Hamilton did pinch Alonso at the apex, but he admitted to the Spaniard being in his blind spot. And after I'd got over my initial annoyance at the collision, when I looked at the onboard of Hamilton, and you have to take the character and the previous history of a driver into consideration. Hamilton isn't the sort of driver who just has accidents with everybody. He's had collisions with drivers, and that's inevitable. He's been racing 15 years. You're going to have a few bumps with drivers along the way. You're not going to be completely clean. And of course, Hamilton is the aggressor in this situation, so he is more at fault for this incident. But for me, it's a racing incident. Because you're asking these drivers to try and give way. And we saw what happened in the Formula 2 and Formula 3 races. Drivers were leaving that space for the car on the inside. Admittedly, none of them were quite as far ahead as perhaps Hamilton was. But everyone on the outside was just getting squeezed to the outside curb, which turned into the left-hander. And some of them would escape across the little escape road. And it all got a bit messy with drivers having to give places back and some not, and yeah. And of course there's the gravel on the outside of turn 6, I think it is. The one before Malbany, the left-hander. So, of course, Hamilton's not going to run Alonso out there, so he's just trying to win the corner first and make Alonso back out of it, I suppose. But he said he couldn't see him. And that is one of the age-old issues with Grand Prix cars. You know, these drivers are sitting so low, the mirrors are hardly worth the name. You know, they're just there for legality reasons, I suppose. They don't really do very much. It's just one of those things, and Alonso's reaction was a little bit unfair, but it's heat at the moment. Of course it is. You know, you've got to take that into consideration, and Hamilton just sort of shrugged it off. You know, some of Alonso's comments towards Hamilton do just sound like pure jealousy, but this one, I think, heat at the moment. But still, calling him an idiot is unfair, to say the least, because if Hamilton had a record of colliding with drivers and pinching them at apexes like that, you know, a little bit of criticism would be warranted. But you know, this is just one of those situations. It happens. You know, get over it, Alonso. His race ended up in P5. Hamilton's ended up finishing before the end of the first lap. Another note I've got here is, could Alonso have backed out? I mean, he could have, but it's Fernando Alonso. It's not really in his nature, is it? And why should he? On the first lap, he's competing for position as legitimately as Hamilton is. And as I said, it's just a racing incident. It's just one of those things. If it was lap 10, perhaps Alonso would have backed out because he'd have maybe known by then that Hamilton was coming past and was faster. But we'll never know. Alright, so now let's dive into my driver ratings for the Belgian Grand Prix. And we'll start, of course, with Max Verstappen, who qualified fastest, but started 14th, courtesy of the grid penalty, and he won the race. I'm going to rate him as a 4.5 because it was a flawless performance, but it was inevitable and too easy. There wasn't that jeopardy, so I can't give him a 5. A 4.5 is what I'm going to give him. He's still the top scoring performer. I think, if I remember correctly, there might be one more 4.5, but at least a couple of 4s in there. And this is what Max had to say after the race. He said, "This whole weekend has been incredible. It's never easy, though. It was quite a hectic first lap staying out of trouble." That's what I mentioned earlier. He had to stay out of trouble. So many things were happening in front of me, and everyone was trying to maintain their spot. And that made his race, because by that point he was up to 8th position and most of the work was done. He just had to get through a few other cars without losing any time or, you know, body work. And no one was really going to fight him because they all knew it wasn't worth their trouble. The only bugbear for me was they didn't make him go around the outside of the bus stop chicane and just make it that little bit harder. But, you know, it would have been small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. So we'll move on to Sergio Perez, who started the race second and finished it second as well. I give Checo a 3.5. He says, "I'm very pleased with that because we have been working so hard. There's plenty to look at, and hopefully I go into next weekend even stronger." He'd been on a bit of a rotten run, Checo. Only 2 podiums in the last 6 races, while Verstappen had won 4 of them. So for him to get back on the podium is very, very good for him, although it doesn't really change anything in terms of his championship. He's not going to catch Verstappen. No one is. I've already told you that. Charles Leclerc of Ferrari started 15th, finished 6th. Well, he finished 5th on the road, but bumped down to 6th because of the penalty. I rate him as a 3 because I think he drove well. The team, maybe less so. He said, "We started well, but then on lap 3, we unfortunately had a tear-off in the brake duct from Verstappen," I might add. So he had to pit, and then when he was in 9th place, that set us back quite a bit. From that moment on, I knew it was going to be a difficult race, but he did what he could. It was difficult with the tyres. Perhaps they should have put the hard tyres on, but maybe they were just a bit concerned after Budapest. Carlos Sainz, first place on the grid. He inherited, so 2nd pole position for Carlos, and that became 3rd in the race. The Red Bulls, just as we've said, just absolutely in a league of one this weekend. And I rate Carlos's performance as a 3. He said, the car felt quite good today and we did our best. Well, he was told to do his best, so I hope he did his best. But our pace just wasn't quick enough this weekend to hold on for the win. Yeah. There you go. Summed up in one sentence. Lewis Hamilton of Mercedes started from 4th, having qualified 7th, I think. And he failed to finish. So I'm going to rate him as a 2. He probably could have done a lot better and in the race had it continued, but you know, that's Grand Prix racing at the end of the day. He said, looking back at the footage, Fernando was in my blind spot and I thought I left more room than I did, so it was my fault and I paid the price. Owned up to his mistake. You know, that's, you know, at the risk of the Fernando Alonso fan club wrath, Alonso wouldn't have owned up to that. We all know that Alonso would have sent the blame elsewhere. It wasn't his fault. Why was the other guy there? Why is he trying to go up the inside when I've clearly won the corner? It just shows you the difference in mentality. And a little bit of humility will go a long way, Fernando. George Russell, 5th place on the grid, became 4th at the flag. I rate him as a 3. He says, I've got mixed feelings right now because had you told me last night we'd be 2 seconds off the podium on merit and pure pace, I'd have said that's a good recovery. And it still was a good recovery, really, because to be that close over the race distance, and that's where the Mercedes comes into its own. It just looks after the tyres and it takes its time with them. And that's frustrating for the drivers, but it does pay you back. If you work these Pirelli tyres in gently, they pay you back later on. And if you overwork them to begin, which Ferrari found early in the season, they trip you up later on. Let's move to Alpine. And talking of Alpine, you can join me on Twitch where I'm going as an Alpine in F1 Manager 2022, only using Alpine Junior drivers. So at the moment I've got Esteban and Fernando Alonso as my drivers, but from there on, after they move on or I replace them, I can only choose Alpine contracted drivers. And that may or may not include Oscar Piastri. We'll see. They had the meeting yesterday. Wait and see what the outcome of that is. So let's start with Ocon. He started from 16th and finished 7th. He made a couple of really nice double overtakes. That was some impressive stuff. And I'm going to rate Esteban as a 4. He said, what a way to wrap up what's been a fantastic weekend for the team. The car was fast and I personally had a lot of fun out there racing today, especially with those double overtakes. Yeah, I mean, I think if Esteban had started in the top 10, there's a chance he may have finished ahead of Fernando Alonso. Because Alonso he definitely had some damage to the front wing. But Ocon drove brilliantly. He was absolutely excellent. And as for Alonso, started 3rd and that became 5th after Leclerc's penalty. So I rate Fernando as a 3. He said, I'm happy with the result today with 5th place. Our performance shows we're consistently ahead of the midfield. It's clear that when we execute our races well, these are the results we can expect to score. Which begs the question, why on earth are you leaving? Why are you going to Aston Martin? I can't see Aston Martin producing a car as good as Alpine's next year, considering where the two machines are at the moment. So it does beg the question. It was a really good weekend for Alpine. They've extended their gap over McLaren to 20 points, which in the midfield, that's pretty handy. It's at least, you know, a couple of races of recovery for McLaren. Talking of whom, Lando Norris started from 17th, finished 12th. I rate him as a 2. He said it was a difficult race, pretty much as expected. It wasn't easy to overtake and got stuck in a DRS train. Daniel Ricciardo, he started from 7th, but that turned into 15th on the weekend where it was announced that he is leaving the team. You can check out the full live stream of my reaction to that on the channel, and I've also just done the shorter bit where it's just the Ricciardo bit. In the full-length version, I also discuss Lewis Hamilton going to 400 Grand Prix and whether that is possible. So for Ricciardo, it's a rating of 2. He said it was visible to see our struggles today, not to be pessimistic, but I knew coming into the race that we would probably find it tough through the first and third sector with the rear wing we were forced to use. Let's move to Alfa Romeo, who had a bit of a weird weekend. They had a quick car, but they had grid penalties, which sent them further back than they probably should have been. And then Bottas got tangled up with Latifi on his birthday. Poor Bottas. And Zhou didn't quite have the pace to come through. I think he got stuck in the DRS train as well. So Bottas from 13th failed to finish, rate him as a 2. Zhou 18th to 14th, also a rating of a 2. Bottas said, we had pace today, but with such a mixed up grid, there could have been opportunities to get a good result, so it's disappointing to finish my race so early. And Zhou said, our pace was quite alright today, despite starting from the back. The race has been quite exciting with lots of action going on. And Haas, they also failed to score. Magnussen started 12th, finished 16th, rate him as a 2. Mick Schumacher also rating as a 2 from 19th to 17th. A difficult weekend for Haas, really. And Kevin said that they had an idea it wasn't going to be such a strong weekend. And Mick said it was especially tough after the safety car restart to see all those cars driving by. They didn't have the top speed, is what he explained. AlphaTauri, they broke their barren streak of points with 9th place for Pierre Gasly. Both cars mysteriously starting from the pit lane. Who'd have thought? I mean, I don't think Verstappen needed any help, but, you know, it's just 2 less cars for him to overtake, I suppose. Gasly from pit lane to 9th. So I rate him as a 3.5. Very nice drive from the Gasman in the Gasmobile. He said it was an amazing race. His 100th race. So congratulations to Pierre Gasly, considering, you know, what we usually see happens to drivers dropped from the Red Bull main team. They don't tend to hang around in Formula One much longer. I mean, Coulthard and Webber both retired. Kvyat then did the old hokey-cokey in and out of Formula One. And now Gasly, he's there. And there's rumours that he's going to end up at Alpine, perhaps. Which, you know, I've long thought would happen. A French super team. But then he signed that new deal with AlphaTauri. So, you know, as we've said before, contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on in Formula One. So well done to Pierre Gasly on 100 races and his 9th place. Yuki Tsunoda, pit lane to 13th, 2.5 rating for him. He said starting from the pit lane was always going to be tough. I think the pace was strong today. We had good strategy and were able to make our way forward, but no points for Tsunoda. So he still hasn't scored since the Spanish Grand Prix, which that's getting on for almost 10 races that he hasn't scored a point. That's concerning when Liam Lawson won the F2 sprint race and has had a bit of an upturn in form and has tested, well, he did a session in FP1 in place of Gasly. Gasly going to Alpine might save Tsunoda. That's perhaps what might happen here. And let's move to the final 2 teams, Aston Martin and then Williams. So Sebastian Vettel started from 10th and he turned that into 8th place. He called it solid, and I'm going to give him a 3.5. He said it was a little unlucky with the timing of the second stop. Came out just behind Pierre Gasly and lost a lap behind him, which allowed Ocon to come past on the new tyres. Lance Stroll, he started 9th, but that went to 11th. So a rating of 2, which I think might be a little bit rough on Lance, but he leaves a bit to be desired. He said things didn't quite work out for us as we'd hoped. Lost positions early on, which made it tough, but we had some fun battles out there in the midfield. And I suppose the expectation for Aston Martin was up here and the performance has been down here. So, yeah, I mean, you have to sort of balance it with that. And Stroll, yeah, a lot of people criticise him, but I don't think he's as bad as people think he is, but he's perhaps not quite, well, he's not a race-winning material driver, I don't think. And let's conclude with Alex Albon and Nicholas Latifi at Williams. Albon started incredible 6th on the grid, got the Williams into Q3 on pure merit in the dry. Of course, Nicholas Latifi got the Williams into Q3 at Silverstone in the wet, which, you know, is a very commendable achievement, but Albon getting the Williams into Q3 in the dry just speaks volumes about the confidence that is going through Albon, especially when that car is working in a good window. Albon can exploit it and is showing just how effective he is. So his 6th place became 9th at the flag. I'm going to rate him as a 4 because his weekend was just fantastic. He said it was one of the tougher races I've done in my career, also one of my personal bests. We did the best job we could and it's a good feeling. So a couple of points for Albon. Latifi turned his 11th on the grid to 18th and last at the flag. So a rating of 2. He said, one to forget, but we'll try to bounce back in Zandvoort. Let's move to race ratings. There were lots of overtakes and some interesting action in the midfield, but the inevitability of Verstappen coming through took the fun out of what on paper could have been a really exciting Grand Prix. It was nice to see Sergio Perez return to some form, but again, Ferrari getting in their own way with strategy is just almost a tale as old as time, and it's unfortunate. On a personal note, Hamilton retiring on lap 1 was really frustrating, but as I said, that's racing at the end of the day. Albon getting the Williams into Q3 and points was superb from him. What an excellent season he is having. So I asked the guys and girls at Grid Talk to give us a race rating. Ruby Price, Owen Medford, Carl King, Tom Downey and Philip Matthew gave the race 4 out of 10. Louis Edwards rated the race a 5, as did I. Yep, that's what I gave it. While George Howson actually gave it a 6. Of course, you can send me a message on Twitter or leave a comment on YouTube with your own race rating. So put them in the comments, send me a message on Twitter at 5_red_lights and let me know how you rated the Belgian Grand Prix. So the checkered flag is now waving on another episode. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what I do, leave a review. If I rocked the mic, give it a like. You can find my written works on f1chronicle.com and insidef2.com. I've also got a website blog of my own, which will be linked in the description of the show, in the show notes below or back a page, depending on how you're consuming this. I've also been live streaming the Alpine Juniors only F1 Manager save on Twitch, so you can follow me on Twitch and join the fun and the adventure there too. I'll see you next week for the Dutch Grand Prix cap, so enjoy the racing this weekend, and I'll see you when the 5 red lights go out.